Do you ever feel like you can't teach something even though it's something that you really know really well? Well, you might be cursed. Hey, what's up? I'm Ken. This is kenfuTV, and each week I release videos in the martial arts, philosophy, technique, training, that sort of thing. If that's the kind of thing you're into, I hope you stick around. I hope you subscribe. I hope you drop a like if you like this video, and I hope that you get in the comments, because each week we talk about comments, and that's opened up into some really great opportunities for some really good conversation. Some of these videos can be longer than the average attention span, so if you want to jump to the part that you're interested in, there's some chapter markers down in the description. So today we're continuing the cognitive bias series. I've already done some videos on the Dunning-Kruger effect and the imposter syndrome, and today we're talking about the curse of knowledge. Sometimes comes under different names. I first heard of it as the burden of knowledge. It's also called the curse of expertise. But really what it comes down to is this concept of being so familiar with something that you struggle to relate to people who are new at it. And by that, I mean you have a tendency to assume that they know more than they do. I think we do this a lot in the martial arts. I know that I do. This has been something on my mind for a long time. It's impacted me in a number of different ways, and I'll talk about at least two of them today. Sometimes I want to refer to this as the black belt effect. It's really easy. I find it really easy for us who have gotten to the black belt to go, black belt's not important, it's just a belt. I see it on the forums all the time, and the Facebook comment threads and groups and stuff all the time. People talking about a belt, somebody comes up with that, should you do this, should you do that? Different things that all involve around the belt. And then there's comments that it's just a belt, it's just a piece of fabric, it's just, whatever. And very dismissive of the whole thing. I call it a bit of the black belt syndrome, because once you have that black belt, it's easy to go, well, it's just a belt. It's not your training, all this stuff. I feel that way. I've got videos about belts and how I feel they tie into your organization and to your instructor and to different schools and all the different thoughts of all the different relations of all the belts. But the truth is, a lot of those concepts that we have when we feel that way come from the fact that we've already done it. It's not a thing we're still trying to do. It's accomplished. Someone without a black belt, the black belt means more. Whether you think it should or not, it does. And it's really easy. And even for you, I know for me, working towards that was something that I wanted. And so it took time and it took effort, and it's something that I put energy into. Thankfully, I had an instructor who talked to me about the fact that it doesn't stop then, it doesn't end then. A lot of people will quit once they get it because it was their goal. It was the thing they were trying to get to the whole time, and then they get that and they stop because, well, I've achieved it. Time to go achieve something else. Thankfully, I didn't have that with my instructor, because the truth is, as we all know, it isn't. Black belt is a marker, and it's almost more of a halfway point. And it might even be less than that. It might be a third of the way or a quarter of the way even, because there's so much to know. And we come to know this over time because we've already done it, because we've already gone through all of that stuff, because we know all of those things that it took to get there, and how much of it mattered and how much of it ultimately didn't matter. It's really easy for us to be dismissive of the idea. Initially, I got on my high horse. There's probably comments out there of me saying things exactly like that. I'd be like, well, it's just a belt, the skill is you, all this stuff. I don't disagree with those things. These are things that I feel, but I never meant for that to be something that took the wind out of anybody. So it's something that I pay more attention to now, is the fact that my feelings on this exist because I'm already there and I already know about it. Bringing that into the curse of knowledge as black belts, as instructors, or just as people who are passionate and know a lot about the topic that they're interested in. The concept itself really comes from the fact of, if you know so much, you might assume things of others. Things in the early parts of your knowledge, the early parts of your learning, they become really basic over time. And pretty soon you're thinking so far out, so far ahead, that they're almost assumed. They're almost automatic. They're things that you don't even think about. There are certain things that we process when we have something that we're passionate about and know a lot about, that we process automatically, and we're already to step 4, 5, or 6 when somebody else is just starting to gather the information for step 1. And so because we can do that, we can quickly gather that information and then make this decision without having to think about it specifically. Sometimes it gets hard to realize that someone else might not have been able to do that. And you could start on step 4, step 5, step 6, whatever it is, and then you get blank stares from people because they are not understanding how you went from what we were just thinking about to here. There was a whole gap in between. I know that I do this. Sometimes I step ahead, and sometimes it's a little bit. Sometimes we work with advanced students or advanced people who are just as passionate or have similar levels of information. And when we do that, sometimes that's smaller because maybe they automatically jump to step 3 and you're on step 4 or step 5. So that gap from where they got to and where you got to automatically is small. But especially when working with beginners, that gap might be rather large. And so it becomes really difficult to process sometimes. And that's, I think, where we hit these blank stares. And I know for me, sometimes it equals a lesson plan that needs rebuilt on the fly, because what started to happen instead was I came out with the idea, here's what we're going to work on. We're going to do this. I think this will be great. Start working on it, and then realize that people don't know the things that they needed, the prerequisites, if you will, for what I wanted to work on today. Or at least the skill level's not there, or whatever it is. The skill level, the knowledge level, something is not up to the level that it needs to be to really take advantage of the lesson I was trying to give, which means suddenly we've got to take a step back and work on those things, build that up. And today's lesson might be for a different day, or maybe by the end of class, we can start working on the beginning of that lesson. This is okay. These are good things to do. In fact, hopefully they are happening. The days that you don't realize that this is happening are the days that you leave people in the dust and they leave confused and they don't really understand. And when you have something you don't understand, well, picture for a minute somebody who speaks fluently or natively a different language. Starting a conversation in that language, mind you, you don't know this language even a little bit. You might know it well enough to identify it, but nothing else. And then they start talking very excitedly and very energetically in that language, never stopping to process whether or not you're picking up on it. They say what they need to say, and they smile and walk off, and you go, I don't know what just happened. I don't have a clue. You know, you got context clues that might tell you little things, but what you really know is that I have no idea what just happened. I have no idea what they said. And our knowledge passes this way. In that case, you could even just refer to that as the curse of knowing a different language than somebody you're trying to talk to. A language barrier. Well, I think of knowledge as having a language barrier too. If I'm talking to you about something at a high level that you don't know at a high level, then it might be like I'm speaking a completely different language. And if I do just that, don't really pay attention to whether or not it's stuck for you, and then leave, you can leave going, what was the value of this? What did I get out of this today? That's really difficult. It could even be really disheartening. If it's something that happens all the time, it could be something that costs student retention or the loss of peers or people around you that want to know more. Like, why can't I get people interested in this? Well, if you're constantly so high above them, they might go, I'm not getting anything out of this. Now, there are things that we can do. There are ways to have better, more effective communication. And those are first to know your audience, because the better you know who you're speaking to and what maybe they have already for knowledge is going to help you be able to communicate with them more clearly. Then you also want to use their vocabulary, not yours. You can work to your vocabulary, you can bridge those terms, but if they have things that help them understand you, you're going to be able to bridge that knowledge quicker by doing that. Personally, I'm a big fan of terminology. I think that it sets the tone and it says a lot about whatever we're talking about. So you can start with their terminology and work into your terminology so that they do eventually understand it and gain the benefit of using those terms. But starting with your terms can be more confusing and not be as effective. You also want to make sure that you don't assume knowledge. By assuming knowledge, we set up a situation where we don't know what's landing and what's not landing. And we don't really know if we're effectively communicating at all. Because, again, I might be on step 5 when you're on step 2. The processing of this knowledge becomes very, very difficult. Lastly, you want to make sure that you double check that knowledge from time to time, that it's sticking, that whatever you're saying, whatever you're doing is landing. What are they understanding? Because if you're bridging this knowledge, you're passing this knowledge into them, and you've passed, we'll call it 100% of the knowledge that you have passed up to this moment, and only 20% of it has stuck so far, then going further and increasing what you're passing is not going to go anywhere. Now, if you've done that and you check and people are caught on 100%, they processed everything that you had to say, then you're ready to move on, you're ready to continue, you're ready to continue passing information to them. Let's not confuse this with the idea that they've received enough. And you might think you know where I'm going with that, but it's probably the opposite. I'm not talking about them not knowing enough about the topic. I'm talking about that sometimes that 100% that you pass to them, when they have that, they've received it, it's great, they might also be done for the day. They might not have room to process more, and your retention of additional knowledge might drop dramatically. So also be mindful of how much have I put into you so far, and how much energy, how much processing power went into understanding this knowledge. I might have tapped you out. We might have talked for 10 minutes, and you might have processed everything, but it might have taken everything out of you to get that far. And so to effectively communicate, effectively pass this knowledge, we gotta also be aware that if we spend another hour and you're only getting 1% out of everything that I'm saying, then we're probably just making it really hard for you to want to do this again. So you gotta make sure that you start there. Start off by knowing your audience, using their terminology to help bridge that gap, not assuming that they know or understand any specific thing, and making sure that you double check with them sometimes to see that they are getting what you're giving. One of the other places that I struggle, and I lump this together, there might be a different term for it, but I lump this together with the burden of knowledge or the curse of knowledge. I find lately that I have a really hard time processing myself. I find myself lately in situations where questions are too vague. There are so many potential answers, so many possibilities based on the simple terms that you use to ask the question that I struggle to know which answer to give. And I don't want to give the wrong one, so I start to loop and struggle on what I need. Say it again, a different way. Refine, too vague. Help me, because without it, I suddenly struggle to know how to answer that question. Let's put it in terms of food for a second. You might ask, where do you want to go for dinner? And you might struggle going, oh God, well, what kind of food do I want? Do I want American? Do I want French? Do I want Italian? Do I want Mexican? What do I want? I've got all these different options that I could have. And then if I have those, what restaurants do I want to go to? And what do I feel like eating? What dish do I want to have? Or if somebody looks at you and says, hey, I'm thinking Mexican, what Mexican restaurant do you want to go to tonight? The answers come quicker because you've eliminated a lot of those other variables that are not necessary to answering the question. And that's sometimes what I find myself stuck in. I didn't always. I don't know when this exactly started happening. It's been kind of frustrating. It's been difficult for me to process because in some ways it makes me feel dumb in the opposite of dumb. This weird situation where I feel like an idiot because I can't process your question, but I can't process it because I don't understand what you're asking. I can't process it because I'm over understanding what you're asking. And that's a really weird moment, and it makes me feel dumb. My solution in general is just to have humility and just ask, what do you mean? Or did you mean this or did you mean that? Or sometimes if I feel it's important on the mat, if I'm giving an answer, sometimes I feel that it's important that you get multiple. If I thought of a handful of things, then I might have 2 or 3 that I'm like, these are all important. Then I approach it from the standpoint of, if you're talking about this is the answer. In the situations where you're talking about this, or if this is what you were asking, then this is the answer. And you might want to also think about this because this could be part of it. Because I also have to, using number 3, I'm unable to assume that you even realized the depth of the question you just asked. If you're not able to process, if you don't know the depth of the question that you just asked, you might not realize how many potential answers that there could be, or more specifically, the fact that those answers might greatly contradict each other. Using an example, some of the classes that I teach are weapons-based classes. In the Filipino martial arts, things that I would do with a stick or an impact weapon might be perfectly logical, perfectly plausible, but then with the blade, it could be drastically different because of the potential to get cut if you put your body in the wrong place, the wrong orientation with the weapon. So if somebody says, so with this, could you do this? Let's just make an example. This is my weapon right now. If I take this weapon and I use in kind of a rear naked choke situation, I'd have to set the weapon into place and I lock it, then that could be fine. I can use my hand this way, not a problem. I could put an impact weapon this way, not a problem. If I'm holding a machete and I take that this way, big problem. And sometimes you don't necessarily realize if you're asking that particular question. And I worry sometimes that people take answers as concrete answers. This was the answer. The more I train, the longer I train, the more I realize that there is no answer. I can't even say that to many things because the only answer that actually exists is the decision, and the only decision that actually exists is the one that you make in that moment with the environment, situation, and variables that you have, and the time you have to process that information. I look at police officers this way all the time. In the moment that they make a decision to do something, they are called constantly to quickly gather all of the information that they have about the situation, the feeling, the people, anything about that situation, and then process and make a decision in an instant because it could mean their lives or the lives of other people. So when you see an officer-involved shooting, for example, this is the most obvious example to me. People watch videos all the time and they process and reprocess and go, why didn't he do this? Or he shouldn't have done that because it was just this. You can clearly see this. Did he clearly see that? Did you have any information about what led up to that and the moments before that, the things that person was saying, the things that person was doing beforehand? All of these things culminate into an answer. And I like to pass that. In the martial arts, I like to pass that to students because at the end of the day, the only person who knows what to do in a situation is you. Even if 2 of you, I could take 2 students that have trained together the entirety of their time, and they could both be standing next to each other in the same situation and have still processed different things about the environment, different things about the situation, different things about the person or the things that are involved, and they could respond differently, even though they're right next to each other in the exact same situation. They could respond differently. So only they know the answer in that moment. And so I struggle with concrete answers because at the end of the day, something that I could believe very strongly is true could not be true in that moment. Or something I believe is very strongly false could be absolutely true in that moment. This reinforces that dilemma that I have, though, where suddenly a simple question, should I do this or should I do that, becomes a machine-stopping problem for me where I go, oh, I have too many things, too many variables. I can't process and answer this. That's something I'm working on. Maybe it's something that you're working on. Maybe it's something that you're running into. Maybe you run into that situation when you're teaching somebody, working with somebody, and you assume that they know more than they do. It can be really frustrating. And this isn't just on the mat. I mean, this happens at work. This happens in life. I mean, this could be you could walk up to the teller, you just need to buy something, and you're asking for something, and you can't process why they don't understand what you're asking for, because it seems so obvious to you. And you can get frustrated and you get angry. And I think people run into these situations and different people handle it differently. And people with short tempers have a tendency to explode out when you can't understand it. They think you're an idiot, or they think that you are making fun of them or something like that. There's different solutions, right? There's one solution is to spend more time being aware, ask more questions of people's understanding, simplify your terminology, and do all these things. These are things that make great teachers. You can do all of that stuff. You could also go the other way. Maybe that's not your strong suit, and potentially you don't want to put energy into making that your strong suit. Then maybe the answer is to put people who are closer to their level with those people, and then when they get through that barrier, then they can talk to you or to the next person before they talk to you, if that's where that's at. I think of that like certain college professors and stuff like that. By the time they get to you, they're sitting in front of you, they've spent time with other people building up a base knowledge. Our education system works that way. There is a level of assumed knowledge because in order to sit in this chair, you have proven that you know at least this much. You should not be able to sit in that chair without knowing this much. So I can make that assumption about you and work at a high level. And that's how high level instruction works, is it involves knowing or setting a standard that has to be met before you go spend that time trying to process and pass information. So you can spend less time trying to simplify and build people up and more time giving them what you know at the high level and helping them excel. I think there's room for both. I think we need both. And I believe that there's other opportunities, other potential answers to this question as well. So I ask you, what are your answers? What situations have you run into like this, and how did you handle it? And have you come up with a different answer other than lowering yourself down or raising a standard before somebody gets to you? What other ways do you deal with this stuff? And how do you manage? For me, I know what's important is that I reassure myself that it's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to have this gap in knowledge. It's why people seek you out. If you know a lot about your topic, then people will come find you. Just because they know that you know a lot about it doesn't mean that they're ready to process the information that you're going to give. So you got to kind of work with that. It's okay to be in that situation. It's also okay to have them work with somebody else and build up that knowledge. And sometimes it's okay to not give them the whole answer because they're not ready to process it, and the whole answer can come later. That one's a little harder for me because sometimes it feels disingenuous. It feels almost like lying if I tell you one answer. So usually I'll tell people, that falls back into that video of maybe and the ideas of I might contradict myself later. I might need to get you to process this now before I can really expand onto you, before you can even start to process that there is more to be understood about this. All in all, the curse of knowledge I think is fascinating. It's an interesting position to find yourself in, and the more you find yourself in it, the more it feels foreign and weird. And sometimes you can feel, so there are people that feel like they don't belong because they don't know enough. There's people that feel like they don't belong because they know too much. Both are acceptable. You've got to give yourself that grace that says, this is okay. You got to remind yourself that sometimes you got to take a step back, that it's okay to build up. I think, honestly, dealing with this is making me a better teacher. Incredibly frustrating, because lately, for whatever reason, it's been significantly worse for me to in these situations, these glitch moments that I run into. But it's making me a better teacher. It's making me look at, how do I get people to that knowledge? If I want to be able to teach this, what do they need to know in order to know that? And how do I get them there? And it's making me a better teacher. It's making me understand my stuff better. They say, the best way to learn is to teach. And that's true, because when you process other people's understanding, there's also, and I almost feel like I'm rambling because there's one other thing, and then I'm cutting it off. I'm not saying anything more about this, because there's also the assumption that the way that you learned, the things that were difficult for you to process about that, and the things that were not difficult for you to process about that are not unique to you, and you think that everybody went through the same thing, but the truth is that is not how that works. Something that might have been fairly obvious to you or easy to you to pick up was not an area that you struggled, so you didn't have to learn a lot about that. In fact, you might even have a deficit in knowledge about the thing that you picked up pretty quickly. And then you have deep knowledge in the thing that you didn't pick up really quickly. Well, if you give a group of 10 people and everybody's going to have different things that they had to work through, the part that was more difficult for them is different. So when you work with different people and you teach, when they run into that point that struggles and it's a place that you didn't have to struggle, then you become a better teacher and a better person of knowledge on that topic, because of the fact that you now have had to process what you did and what they did in order to get there. And then you multiply that out and you have a tendency to start to understand things in a multifaceted global level. I think it's beautiful. I think it's great. And I think it's one of the most inspiring parts of teaching. And then to be able to pass all of that on to somebody else is the ultimate goal. At least it is for me, to let other people pick up where I left off and continue. We'll go and talk really quickly from one of the comments from last week, and then we'll wrap this video up. Okay, we're talking comments. This time we're talking a comment from Jeremy Hillard. This was a comment I really wanted to talk about. There were a number of different ones that I really liked, but in this case he says, if you feel guilty of experiencing imposter syndrome, you're guilty of a trait we all should possess: humility. It's people who don't have this trait that I'm wary of. I avoid or do my best to. I struggle with this a little bit because I believe that there's a middle area. I believe that humility is really important, and I agree with you. I also believe that ego is the opposite of that. So we'll put a word to it. I believe that ego is that opposite. You've got humility on one extreme end, and then you've got ego on the other end. But I don't think that the imposter syndrome is humility. Honestly, I think one of the most interesting things about the imposter syndrome is this idea that it's just a misinterpretation of what people know around you. You don't have humility. I feel like humility is maybe even knowing that you know a fair bit, but not putting that out to others, to, respecting that they might have different levels of knowledge. They might know more than you, they might know less than you, and just being humble. Whereas I feel the imposter syndrome is where you just don't accurately have an understanding of your level of knowledge compared to the people around you, and worse yet, you have a tendency to believe that everybody around you knows more than you, and that you don't deserve to be the person. I don't know. It's probably a gray area. It's probably a weird line between those two. I feel like they are intimately related, but not the same thing. I don't know. What do you think? How would you line out the concept of the imposter syndrome and humility? Jeremy, I appreciate you sharing that comment. I definitely don't disagree. Humility is something we should all possess, and we should all work to incorporate in our lives. I think it's really, really important. It's a big part of being a good person and being a good member of society, a good person in your community, is being able to allow space for other people in your community. And I think humility is the answer to that. All right, now let's go wrap this video up. Okay, so that's it. Do you struggle with the curse of knowledge? Is that a thing that you've run into? Are there tricks that you have for working with it? Especially, do you run into that glitch situation where somebody asks a simple question and the answers are so numerous that you struggle to process even where to begin? And if you do, I want to hear tips for that. What your thoughts are, things that you've done to make it better, because I'm struggling right now with that. If you like what I'm doing, if you like these videos, you can subscribe right here. There's a playlist of videos like this right here. When it's ready, the rest of the comments from last week will be right here. And here's another one that you might like. I'm Ken. This is kenfuTV, and I'll catch you in the next one.